I was driving my trusty old truck down a deserted road in the dead of night. The only sounds were the engine rumbling beneath me and the occasional creak of the truck bed. The only source of light came from my headlights, casting a dim glow on the empty road ahead. As I drove further down the road, an uneasy feeling crept up my spine. It was as if I was being watched, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up in response. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the road. I slowed down, squinting to see who or what it was. As I got closer, I realized that it was a woman dressed in a tattered white dress, her hair disheveled and her face twisted into a grotesque sneer. I tried to speed up and get away from her, but the truck suddenly lurched to a stop. I panicked, slamming my foot on the gas pedal, but the truck wouldn't budge. That's when I noticed that the woman was now standing directly in front of the truck, her face inches away from the windshield. I could see every detail of her twisted features, and her eyes bore into mine with a malevolent intensity. Suddenly, she let out a blood-curdling scream, and the truck started to shake violently. I was frozen in fear, unable to move or even scream for help. As the shaking intensified, I saw the woman's face begin to contort and stretch, her eyes bulging out of their sockets and her mouth opening impossibly wide. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went still. The woman was gone, and the truck started up again as if nothing had happened. But I knew that I would never forget what I had seen. The woman's twisted face haunted me for weeks afterward, and I never drove down that road again. From that moment on, I was convinced that there are things in this world that are far beyond our understanding, and that sometimes, the only thing we can do is run. After the incident, I started having nightmares about the woman every single night. Her distorted face would appear in my dreams, and her scream echoed in my mind long after I woke up. But the nightmares were not the only thing that changed. I also noticed a shift in my personality. I became more paranoid and easily frightened. I stopped driving at night and avoided any kind of scary movies or books. One day, while I was grocery shopping, I saw the woman again. She was standing at the end of the aisle, staring at me with those same malevolent eyes. My heart started racing, and I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to scream or even breathe. Suddenly, the woman's face contorted once again, and she let out that same ear-piercing scream. The lights in the store flickered, and the shelves started to shake. I knew that I had to get out of there, and fast. I stumbled out of the store, gasping for air, and got into my truck. But when I turned the key, the engine wouldn't start. I tried again and again, but it was as if the truck was dead. And then, in the distance, I saw the woman slowly approaching me. I knew that I was trapped. I was at the mercy of this entity, this thing that I couldn't comprehend. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the shaking stopped. The woman disappeared, and my truck started up again as if nothing had happened. I knew then that I had to find out what was happening to me. I did some research and found out that the woman I had seen was a ghost that haunted that stretch of road. Legend had it that she had been killed by her husband and was seeking revenge on any man who crossed her path. But even armed with this knowledge, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that followed me wherever I went. I knew that I had to confront the woman and put an end to her haunting once and for all. So, one night, I drove down that road again. I saw the woman standing at the edge of the road, and I braced myself for the worst. But instead of screaming or attacking me, she simply disappeared into thin air. And that was it. The nightmares stopped, and the feeling of being watched went away. I finally felt like I could breathe again. But I knew that I would never forget the terror that I had felt at the hands of that vengeful spirit. Despite the ghostly apparition disappearing before my eyes, I knew deep down that this was not the end of my experience. There was something else, something sinister, that was brewing in the darkness. Days went by without incident, but I felt that uneasy feeling creeping up on me again. My mind was haunted by the image of the woman's face, and the sound of her piercing scream echoed in my ears. One night, I woke up to find my room filled with a thick, choking mist. I could barely breathe, and my heart raced as I fumbled around for the light switch. When I finally managed to turn on the lights, I saw that the mist was not just any ordinary fog, but a swirling vortex of black and white. Suddenly, I heard the same ear-piercing scream that had haunted me for weeks. The sound was coming from the vortex, and I knew that I had to confront whatever was on the other side. With trembling hands, I reached out and stepped into the vortex. It was like nothing I had ever experienced before. It felt like I was being sucked into a void, a place where time and space did not exist. When I finally emerged on the other side, I found myself in a place that was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. The world was dark and twisted, the air was thick with an acrid smell of death, and the ground was covered with a thick layer of ash. And then, I saw her. The woman was standing in the distance, beckoning me to come closer. I knew that I had to confront her, to put an end to whatever curse had been placed upon me. As I approached her, I saw that she was not alone. There were other ghosts, other spirits, all staring at me with the same malevolent intensity as the woman. I knew then that I was not just dealing with a vengeful spirit, but with something much more powerful. Something that I could never have imagined. The ghosts started to close in on me, their screams echoing through the dark, twisted world. I knew that I had to get out, that I had to find a way back to the real world. With all the strength I could muster, I pushed my way through the ghosts and ran towards the light that was shining in the distance. As I got closer, the vortex appeared before me again, and I stepped through it. When I emerged on the other side, I was back in my room, gasping for air. I looked around, and everything was as it should be. But I knew that the darkness was still out there, lurking in the shadows. And I knew that I would never be the same again. The horrors that I had seen had scarred me for life, and I would never forget the feeling of being trapped in a world beyond my control. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen around me. Objects would move on their own, doors would open and close without explanation, and I would hear whispers and footsteps coming from empty rooms. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that the experience in the vortex had simply shaken me up. But the signs were too clear to ignore. Something was still haunting me, still seeking its revenge. One night, I woke up to find the woman standing at the end of my bed. Her face was twisted into a grotesque mask of anger and hate, and her eyes glowed with a sickly green light. She reached out towards me, and I felt a cold hand close around my neck. I tried to scream, but no sound would come out. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or fight back. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the woman vanished. I was left gasping for air, my heart racing, and my body drenched in sweat. I knew then that I had to find a way to end this once and for all. I consulted with experts in the paranormal, seeking any solution that would put an end to the haunting. One of them suggested that I perform a cleansing ritual, to rid my house of any evil spirits that might be lurking there. I followed the instructions carefully, burning sage and reciting ancient incantations, but the haunting only grew worse. Another suggested that I seek out a psychic, someone who could communicate with the spirits and help me to understand what they wanted. But every psychic I spoke to either refused to help me or told me that the spirits were too powerful for them to deal with. I was at my wit's end when I stumbled upon a book, hidden away in the dusty shelves of an old bookstore. The book claimed to contain a powerful ritual, one that could banish even the most stubborn and malevolent spirits. Without hesitation, I bought the book and began to study it. The ritual was complex and dangerous, but I was willing to do anything to end the haunting. I gathered all the materials I needed, and on a dark and stormy night, I performed the ritual. It was like nothing I had ever experienced before. The air crackled with energy, and I could feel the spirits around me, writhing in anger and fear. But then, in a blinding flash of light, the ritual was over. The spirits were gone, banished from this world forever. I felt a sense of relief and triumph, but also a deep sadness. The haunting had taken a toll on me, and I knew that I would never be the same again. But at least I could finally move on, finally leave the darkness behind and face the light once more. As I drove my truck on the long and winding road, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air was thick with tension, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that the events of the past few weeks had made me paranoid. But then I saw her, standing by the side of the road. The woman from the vortex was back, and this time she was standing in the middle of the road, blocking my path. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The truck careened off the road, tumbling down a steep embankment and into a ravine. As the truck tumbled end over end, I felt myself being thrown around like a rag doll. I heard the sound of metal crunching and glass shattering, and I knew that I was going to die. But then, just as suddenly as the accident had started, it was over. The truck came to a stop, and I was left lying there, battered and bruised, but somehow still alive. As I crawled out of the wreckage, I saw her again, the woman from the vortex. She was standing at the top of the ravine, watching me with a look of triumph on her face. I knew then that this was no accident, that she had caused the crash to get her revenge. And I knew that I had to find a way to stop her before it was too late. But how do you stop a spirit, a being that exists in a realm beyond our understanding? I was out of options, out of ideas. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the woman vanished. I was left alone in the darkness, with nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the steady beating of my heart. I knew then that I had to keep moving, keep fighting, keep searching for a way to end this once and for all. I got back into my truck and started driving again, heading towards a future that was as uncertain as it was dangerous. As I drove on, my mind raced with thoughts of how to end this haunting once and for all. I knew that the woman from the vortex was after me, and I had to find a way to stop her before she caused any more harm. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, and a voice spoke out from the static. "You can't escape me," the voice whispered. "I will always be with you." I slammed my fist down on the radio, trying to silence the voice. But it only grew louder, more insistent. I knew then that I was dealing with something far beyond my understanding, something that could not be defeated by ordinary means. I drove on, the road stretching out before me like a dark ribbon. The sky overhead was filled with storm clouds, and lightning flashed in the distance. And then, just as suddenly as the voice had started, it stopped. The static faded away, and the radio fell silent once more. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that maybe the woman had finally given up. But then I heard the sound of footsteps, coming from somewhere outside the truck. I looked out the window and saw her, standing there in the darkness. She was closer now than she had ever been before, and I knew that this was it. This was the final showdown. I got out of the truck, and we stood there facing each other, two beings from different worlds locked in a battle for survival. The woman's eyes blazed with a sickly green light, and I felt a cold wind blowing around us. It was like standing in the eye of a hurricane, with nothing but chaos and destruction all around. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the wind stopped. The woman's eyes grew dull, and she collapsed to the ground. I knew then that it was over, that the haunting was finally at an end. I got back into my truck and drove away, leaving the darkness behind and heading towards a new dawn. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman from the vortex was still out there somewhere, waiting for her chance to strike again. But for the moment, I was safe. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. I tried my best to put the haunting behind me, but I could never shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me. And then, one night, as I was driving through a deserted stretch of highway, I saw her again. The woman from the vortex was back, standing in the middle of the road once more. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The truck careened off the road and into a ditch. As I stumbled out of the truck, I saw the woman again, standing there in the darkness. Her eyes blazed with that sickly green light, and I knew that she was back for revenge. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like I was stuck in place, unable to escape the woman's grasp. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the woman vanished. I was left alone in the darkness, with nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the steady beating of my heart. I knew then that I had to find a way to end this haunting once and for all. I had to confront the woman and put an end to her reign of terror. But how do you defeat a being that exists in a realm beyond our understanding? I was out of options, out of ideas. And then, just as suddenly as I had given up hope, a light appeared in the distance. It was like a beacon, drawing me towards it. I followed the light, and it led me to an old abandoned church. As I entered the church, I saw the woman again, standing at the altar. I knew then that this was it, my chance to end the haunting once and for all. I charged towards her, and we clashed in a final battle. The woman's eyes blazed with that sickly green light, and I felt a cold wind blowing around us. But this time, I was ready. I had learned from my past mistakes, and I knew how to defeat her. I closed my eyes and focused all of my energy on the task at hand. And then, with one final burst of energy, I banished the woman back to the vortex. I knew then that it was over, that the haunting was finally at an end. I walked out of the church, leaving the darkness behind and heading towards a new dawn. As I stepped outside, I saw that the sky had cleared, and the sun was rising in the distance. The air felt fresh and clean, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I knew that I had done the right thing, that I had banished the woman from the vortex and ended the haunting once and for all. But as I walked away from the church, I heard a voice behind me. It was the voice of the woman, whispering my name. I turned around, but there was no one there. It was like the voice was coming from inside my own head. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the voice stopped. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't get the feeling of the woman's presence out of my mind. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. I tried my best to put the haunting behind me, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something was still watching me, waiting for me. And then, one night, as I was driving through a deserted stretch of highway, I saw her again. The woman from the vortex was back, standing in the middle of the road once more. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The truck careened off the road and into a ditch. As I stumbled out of the truck, I saw the woman again, standing there in the darkness. Her eyes blazed with that sickly green light, and I knew that she was back for revenge. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like I was stuck in place, unable to escape the woman's grasp. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the woman vanished. I was left alone in the darkness, with nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the steady beating of my heart. I knew then that the haunting was far from over, and that the woman from the vortex would continue to haunt me for the rest of my life. Just as I was about to give up hope, the woman from the vortex appeared in front of me once again. But this time, something was different. She was wearing a bright pink tutu, and her hair was tied up in pigtails. Instead of her usual menacing glare, she was grinning from ear to ear. "What's so funny?" I asked, confused. The woman chuckled. "You really thought I was trying to haunt you, didn't you?" "Oh, sweetie, I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to help." I stared at her in disbelief. "Help with what?" "You're driving, of course. You're always swerving and almost crashing. I just wanted to give you a little scare to make you more alert on the road," she explained, still grinning. I couldn't believe it. All this time, I thought the woman was haunting me, when in reality, she was just trying to help me be a better driver. I burst out laughing, and the woman joined in. We spent the rest of the night driving down the deserted highway, chatting and laughing like old friends. As the sun began to rise, the woman disappeared into the vortex once more. But this time, I knew that she wasn't gone for good. She would always be there, watching over me and making sure that I stayed safe on the road. From that day on, I never took my driving skills for granted again. And whenever I found myself drifting off or getting too comfortable, I would remember the woman from the vortex and her bright pink tutu, and I would smile. Months had passed since my encounter with the woman from the vortex, and I had learned to appreciate her presence in my life. I had become a more attentive driver, and I always felt a sense of comfort knowing that she was watching over me. One day, as I was driving down the same stretch of highway where I had first encountered her, I noticed something unusual up ahead. There was a car that had crashed off the side of the road, and its driver was slumped over the steering wheel. Without hesitation, I pulled over and ran to the car, trying to help the driver. But as I reached for the door handle, I heard a voice behind me. "Be careful," the woman from the vortex warned. "It's a trap." I turned around, and there she was, standing just a few feet away. Her eyes were still glowing that sickly green, but this time, there was a sense of urgency in her voice. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. But then, I remembered all the times that the woman had helped me, and I knew that I could trust her. "Thank you," I whispered, before turning back to the car. With the woman's guidance, I was able to safely rescue the driver and call for help. As I watched the ambulance drive away, I felt a sense of relief and gratitude wash over me. I turned to the woman, ready to thank her once more, but she was gone. In her place was a small note, which simply read, "Stay safe, my friend. You never know when you'll need a guardian angel." As I drove away, I knew that I would never forget the woman from the vortex, and that she would always hold a special place in my heart. For all the fear and uncertainty that she had caused me, she had also brought me a sense of safety, comfort, and even friendship. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to hit the like button and consider subscribing to our channel for more great content. Your support helps us continue to create and share valuable information with you. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.